Okay, so John, so you're going to say yeah.
Yeah, you talked about Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was the one
Yes,
who,
yes, yes, yes. Obama. How
yeah,
Obama
yeah,
actually coalesced because
yeah.
black people felt after he had won some primaries against Hillary Clinton. Okay, this is our best chance against the latest evil Republican that we have to be afraid of, which in
Yeah,
that case, John
I,
McCain.
if you indulge me for just a couple minutes, I'm going to culminate with Barack Obama, but I want to begin with Jimmy Carter because it's really kind of a very linear story. Jimmy Carter was the first president to govern, the first president since FDR to govern outside of the New Deal consensus. In other words, this was the beginning of the post-industrial state, and Jimmy
Okay,
Carter, a Southerner, which meant that he didn't have any connection to the unions, which was a big deal. Most of the Democratic presidents had some kind of connection to the unions, and he didn't have any understanding of it. And he also um, he saw this conservative juggernaut led by Ronald Reagan. He saw it coming his way, and so he took preemptive steps against it. So he's the one who actually killed the nationwide federal jobs bill, right? It was really Jimmy Carter who killed it because he thought it would open him up to criticism from the right in the 1980 presidential election. And ironically, Robert F. Kennedy saw the same thing, but he wanted to defeat this conservative juggernaut in another way, which was by reuniting this sort of tattered garment of workers, right? So he said very specifically before he was assassinated, I want to unite the college kids, the black working class, and the union workers, not the rank, not the leaders, but the rank and file. I want to reunite them in a kind of Democratic Party quote. That could have been revolution. That could have changed the trajectory of America. We might be in a very different country if he had survived and managed to do that. And I don't know, maybe he wouldn't have, right? But Robert Kennedy was a mercurial character in a lot of ways. But Jimmy Carter ruled, and he opened the door by moving to the right, which meant what? He's not responding to his base. That continues obviously with Reagan, who wins the landslide because we have a very deep recession, the deepest since the Depression, and Ronald Reagan's raison d'etre is to divide the black and white working class, to dismantle the New Deal consensus, which is that is his enemy, right? Because without it, you cannot redistribute wealth from working class to the rich. That's what Ronald Reagan was about. He made some headway. It was kind of the camel's nose under the pup tent, but it was Bill Clinton who doubled down. Think about this for 1 second. I'm coming to Obama. Just bear with me 1 second.
yeah, the
Bill
DLC
Clinton in
Democratic Leadership
1992,
Council.
the Democratic leader, the second time that Bill Clinton ran for office, the Democratic Leadership Council was created basically as a response to Jesse Jackson's very progressive, probably to this day, the most progressive presidential campaign, certainly an effective one, presidential campaign in history. The Democrats had been out of office by 1992. They had been out of office for 12 years. They didn't know if they were going to get back in. They were looking for a strategy that would be a winning ticket for them. So they had, on the one hand, on the left, Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition, which was a big tent, which got people to vote who otherwise would not have voted, which really seemed to be the wave of the future. And on the other hand, they had Ronald Reagan's, tribalism, right, which actually attracted well, no, it was deliberate. Certainly attracted white racist voters. It appealed to their racism. They had a thing. We had a thing called the Reagan Democrats, which was the home of which was identified as Macomb County, a suburb of Detroit. White working class voters. Many of them worked at the auto industry, and they hated blacks. They saw anything black they saw as bad, everything white they saw as good. It was almost a binary definition. And that was sort of the home of this idea of Democrats who found some appeal in Reagan. Bill Clinton, they could have gone like Jesse Jackson and created this big tent, right? Widen that tent that Jesse Jackson had created for them. They went the total opposite direction. they decided they were going to appeal to the white racist votes by doing what? By punishing blacks, by showing that the Democrats are not Jesse Jackson's party. We are here to punish blacks just like the Republicans are. So people talk about the Omnibus Crime Bill of 1994 and how the disparate penalties for blacks was unintended. It was not unintended. It was intended. It was the point. It was to show white people, white racists in particular, no, we got them under control. Don't you worry, right? This continues to this day where we see Kamala Harris running a campaign in which she is appearing with Liz Cheney, and she is openly telling black people, I ain't got, like they used to talk about brothers in jail, used to say, you know, if you ask for a cigarette, they would say, I ain't got nothing for you, man, right? That's what Kamala Harris is telling black people. I ain't got nothing for you, man. I'm better than him, though. That's all she's got. Obama was, honestly, I think what we're going to see is that Obama was there. Are you still there? Did I freeze?
Yeah,
Did I
freeze still here. Uh-oh. Yeah, I'm still here. Uh-oh.
Okay, I thought I lost you there for a second.
Yeah.
Obama was probably it was a brilliant idea, really, right? Obama was really born as a politician. The politics of people like Obama, neoliberal black people, right, was born literally days after Chicago's first black mayor, a really true progressive, and he might have been the most progressive mayor in American history, second to, probably when he died, he's probably second to Marion Barry, who was really a very transformative mayor here in Washington, D.C. He died just a year into his second term. I think Thanksgiving Eve in 1989, I think it was, he dropped dead of a heart attack. Very progressive mayor who really transformed Chicago just in one term in office, basically. And almost immediately, the establishment in Chicago, that's why so many of these Democratic Party figures you see are from Chicago. Rahm Emanuel, David Axelrod. They started this, how do we recreate a Harold Washington who works for us, right? And so the first iteration, and I remember this very well because he talked differently. And I knew, even as a young person, I knew that doesn't sound like us, right? There's a guy named Mel Reynolds who ran for the congressional seat in South Shore, Chicago, later held by Jesse Jackson Jr. He ran for that seat. He ran 3 times, I think, before he finally won. He was a Harvard grad. He was a neoliberal. So when he got in office, he voted for NAFTA. He voted against he voted for the Omnibus Crime Bill. He was a neoliberal. He talked different. And in Chicago, I later found this out, people didn't know him really, right? He was sort of a product of the University of Chicago, where John Mearsheimer is today, and a product of the think tanks, the big think tanks, right? And I think
things on top of that.
Yes. The plan was for him to be the first Obama, but he had a problem with underage women, right? Teenage girls, and so he got jammed up. And there's a story I tell. I can't go into too much of the weeds; it's a little bit complicated. But there was an activist, actually a journalist activist, who was responsible almost singularly for Harold Washington. That the Democratic Party in Chicago, after the first mayor Daley had died, the pharaoh of Chicago had died, black people were just getting short shrift in Chicago, right? Schools, resources, housing, all these things, black people got short shrift. And even after he died, they got short shrift. And so the mayor was famously hostile to the black community, even though they had elected her. It was black turnout that elected her, very much like the Democrats today. So this guy's name was Lou Trell Palmer, and he was famously sort of ornery, but smart. And he organized black workers, really organized a movement where they would identify a black candidate to run for mayor, and then they would do everything: raise money, register voters, drive people to the polls. It was a movement which I think could be a model for the black community writ large today. But they got Harold Washington elected. And remember, Chicago was not then, nor is it now, a majority black city. It is basically a third black, a third white, and a third Latino. So without getting really any white votes, they won that election by getting like 90% of the black vote, 80% or 90% turnout, something like that. And like half of the Latino vote or 60% of the Latino vote, and like 5% of the white vote. They didn't do white people. But Harold Washington won and became the first black mayor. And he was transformative. He really was in a lot of different ways, not just for blacks, but for the entire working class of Chicago. So he drops dead. They find this guy, Mel Reynolds. Mel Reynolds doesn't pan out because he's got a fetish for teenagers, teenage girls. And a few years later, Barack Obama's on the scene, and he wants to run for Bobby Rush's seat, I think it is. And there's already there's somebody else who's running, and
the Republicans had the Republicans had one of the most like batshit like crazy black Christian fundamentalists in the form of I'm completely blanking on his name.
I know you're talking about Alan Keyes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. He was later. But this was around, I think it was around like 1998 or so. Obama wanted to run for this congressional, I think it was Mel Reynolds congressional seat, which Bobby Rush took. And he went to Lou Palmer and asked for his blessing. And Lou Palmer listened to Barack Obama. He didn't know him. And he listened to him. And Lou Palmer, he tells the story. He's now late, but Lou Palmer would tell the story. He said, I was listening to him and I was trying to figure out who he sounded like. And he said, and then it struck me. And he said to Obama, he said, man, you sound like Mel Reynolds, right? And he dismissed him, right? Just said he was unoriginal and corny, and he dismissed him, right? But that's the point. Barack Obama was Mel Reynolds. He was meant to be the mold, the Harold Washington who served the plutocrats, not the people, right? And that is Barack Obama's raison d'etre, right? He came, and it was a brilliant move. Think about when it happened. We had the subprime mortgage crash, which was predicated on dispossessing Black and Latinos, especially, of their homes with these fraudulent mortgages. That's not my term. That is the FBI's term. Most of them were fraudulent. They targeted Blacks and Latinos, right? And the banks did not want to give that money back, right? And they still wanted to get paid. Think about what Barack Obama did, particularly in terms of that subprime mortgage crisis. Most asset bubbles are dealt with in a very particular way, in which the assets are overpriced. So to restore buying power, what do you have to do? You have to give it a shave. You have to give it a haircut, is what they call it. You shave down the cost of that loan, so people can pay it and still spend money in the broader economy. Obama didn't do that with the subprime loan crisis. He threw the money at the banks. In lieu of people's lost buying power, he threw the money at the banks and basically told them what? Do it again. And that's the problem we're living with now, created by Obama, who was just following orders, right? But when I think we should hold him accountable for following orders. But Obama basically, he basically recreated the bubble by printing money to hand over to banks and corporations in lieu of the lost buying power, the lost income in our pockets. If you think about that, it's not just that it's scandalous, but you don't have to be an economist to understand that's not a functioning economy. And so that's what we're dealt with now. We have an election in a few days pitting a genocider against a madman, right? I'm not going to vote for Kamala Harris, but neither am I going to tell you that Donald Trump is not dangerous. He is very dangerous. Just that, he's not a genocider, so I'm not going to vote for either one. But
that is quite incredible about Barack Obama, because I had my bullshit detector, and I was just never impressed with Barack Obama. I always thought he was a boring, uninspiring, centrist windbag. But I think that goes to show you just how powerful the corporate media is. And while people talk a good game about how they don't trust the media, they don't trust the corporate media because look at what they did to us with Iraq, look at what they did to us with the subprime mortgage scandal and stuff like that. But yet, folks still will, but yet folks will still return to that very same discredited media when it comes to We have to save Libyans from this murderous dictator. We have to save Syrians from this murderous dictator. Putin's our enemy. The Chinese are, are our enemies, and it's just amazing. And Barack Obama is a very great example of that. Hence, why he deserved, the award he got from the public relations industry on his,
Right, right, right,
on his
right,
campaign alone. And
right.
Glenn Ford even said that many people in the black corporate liberal media world were very upset when he was asking Obama tough questions. He was going to give him a bad grade on where do you stand on single payer health care, where do you stand on NAFTA, where do you stand on the jobs program, and it was very obvious to both Glenn and Bruce that, dude, this guy is just another right-wing
Yeah, yeah,
Democrat, and yet
yeah,
they were really pressured to not be mean towards Obama.
yeah.
But yes, let's talk. Yeah, let's talk about
Can
the.
I just say one thing
Yeah,
though?
go
Can I
ahead.
just say one thing about Obama? And I agree with you. I was never impressed with him either. Not because I'm smart, but I just had some sort of intuition because I was familiar with Chicago and its story. I never trusted him. But let me just say this though: if you weren't impressed with Obama's charisma, and I wasn't either, I bet you are impressed with it now though after seeing Kamala Harris run for president, right? Because if Obama was charmless, right, she is just. I mean, it's like watching a rock talk. She is. I mean, I look at her, I just think, damn. I mean, Obama was so much better than her, though.
Then, but that's a good segue. Now, actually, before we talk about Kamala Harris and Trump, and then I have to ask this question, what is Biden's legacy when it comes to socioeconomics in the U.S. And his policy abroad? Yes, he's only going to be a one-term president due to his age and cognitive decline. So what would you say is Joe Biden's legacy, socioeconomics in the U.S. and abroad?
Um, that's a great question.
And it's
I
funny
don't.
because and it's funny because I'm pretty sure when you ask Joe Biden supporters, okay, what are three things? And I usually say to people, what are just three things about Joe Biden on his like socioeconomics, just in the U.S. alone, which means this guy deserves another election, and hardly anybody can come up with an answer apart from he ain't Donald Trump.
And that's really all you can say about him. I mean, first of all, let's be very honest. He did win the general, but he didn't win the primary. I am sure that they rigged the primary against Bernie. Bernie Sanders, left to his own devices, was going to win that primary, and the Democratic Party clearly intervened to rig that primary, which doesn't speak well of the Democratic Party and doesn't speak well of Bernie Sanders that he allowed them to do it.
And in fact, actually, going back though to our complaints about the white socialists and the white Marxists, I will say the very following when it comes to Bernie Sanders. I do like Bernie Sanders's domestic agenda. On foreign policy, I have lots to criticize with Bernie Sanders, but certainly some of the opinions he has expressed, like I would never accept Henry Kissinger's
right, right.
endorsement, and him not being for the Iraq War. You can give Bernie some credit, and he does
Oh,
say
no question, no question.
but that being said, yeah, and I think Bernie does have a very good socialist reformist agenda for Americans, but I don't think it was identity politics that crashed Bernie Sanders' campaign,
Oh
as
no, no, no,
Finkelstein says. There were
no.
people who tried to do that, and that
Yeah,
was and that was the Clinton campaign. They did use very
yeah.
cynical.
And I think Norman Finkelstein, he says that as well. It was
Exactly,
identity politics.
exactly.
So.
Now there were very unfair attacks on Bernie Sanders that his campaign only appealed to to, you know, white men. That's nonsense. The whole Bernie Bros,
It,
that was
very much.
nonsense. And there were some people who should have supported Bernie Sanders, given his CV on always fighting for American workers, that didn't support him for the most stupidest of, for the most stupidest of reasons. But that being said, I think what costed, Bernie, the second time, I think what costed Bernie, though, the second time around is that he simply did not fight Joe Biden. And he continued
Yes.
to say constantly that he's my friend. He went on Stephen
Yes.
Colbert, and when Stephen Colbert says, "Do you think that Joe Biden has a chance of winning against Donald Trump?" Bernie Sanders said yes. And the fact that Bernie Sanders didn't fight against the DNC lawsuit,
No question. No
in which,
question.
in which WikiLeaks revealed that the Democrats cheated him, the fact that Bernie didn't support the DNC lawsuit and just continued to be mascot for the Democratic Party, an independent in name only, that's why hardcore Sanders supporters started to disengage themselves from
No
Bernie.
question.
And when it
Yeah.
came to and when it came to imperialism, although Tulsi Gabbard has gone completely batshit now, when it came to issues of imperialism and so forth, Tulsi Gabbard was much better than Bernie Sanders. So I'll just
Yeah. Yeah.
say
No, no.
that. But then
Yeah.
I think, yeah. So actually, yeah, I'm curious your response on that before we talk about Kamala and Trump.
Yeah, well, Bernie, I mean, I think Bernie could have revolutionized the country, very similar to what I think Robert F. Kennedy might have done. His ideas were clearly appealing to a broad swath of the electorate, including African Americans, Latinos, and women. I mean, he really captured people's imagination and did something I've not seen before. He actually managed to spark a movement from the top down, right? There was an actual viable movement that was in place when Joe Biden stole the primary nomination from him, and it had been generated from the top down. Usually, it's from the bottom. Almost always, it's from the bottom up, from the grassroots. But he managed with his ideas to spark it from the top down. But there's no question, I think, and not Joe Biden and the Democratic Party still the way people think of, and that they got the South Carolina congressman, black South Carolina congressman.
Clyburn, right?
Yeah, Clyburn.
Jim.
That wasn't it. What they did, I wrote about this, and although the story has been kind of famously hidden on the internet, about how 4 things happened in the primaries on Super Tuesday and afterwards that never happened before. Not one of them has ever happened before. So all 4 of them, particularly Joe Biden, for instance, won Massachusetts, a state he did not campaign in, and it's on the border of Vermont. Like that, how did that happen? That's not happened before in history. He won in Texas, I think. He never campaigned in Texas, right? The exit polls showed sometimes a difference of, I think something like almost all of them were more than 4%. The difference between the exit polls and the actual tally, there was a difference of about 4%. Typically, in international elections, the international monitors will say, "Oh, that's not. There's a problem here, right? This is not a free and fair election. There's a difference of 4%." I think if I recall, I might be wrong about this, but as I recall, there were differences of as much as 12% in some of these Super Tuesday primaries that Joe Biden allegedly won. So I think they rigged it, and I mean that in a very direct way. I don't mean just in a politicking sort of way. So that's the first thing. But as far as Joe Biden's legacy, that's a very good question. He's so unremarkable. I mean, he's almost like a Herbert Hoover character, right? Like he's almost lost to history because he's so unremarkable in his subordination to capital, right? He's just basically continuing all the neoliberal policies of all of his predecessors, but he's doing so without any kind of, I mean, you can almost, I hate to say this, but you can almost ascribe a personality to all of the presidents before him in carrying out this neoliberal mission. Clinton, who I think was a horrific human being for so many different reasons. He did have a certain Southern charisma, right? Perhaps exaggerated by the media, but he did. Barack clearly had some talent. It was not genuine. It wasn't. I don't think he was as intelligent as people made him out to be, but he did have some sort of charm, I guess we call it. George Bush, the same, very homespun, very artificial, perhaps. What would you say about Joe Biden? I mean, he's never been an impressive man, which is why he lost the presidency. He never even made it as far as the being nominated before the
But
2020 run. I mean, I
I
just think
also,
he's so unremarkable.
I think it also has something to do with the fact that and I don't like Joe Biden even when even when he's quote unquote normal, but the Joe Biden the Joe Biden of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and the Joe Biden as VP to Barack Obama was a much different Joe Biden than the one we've been seeing, in which it's actually cruel that his cult followers, his family, and so forth forced him to govern when he clearly just did not have the mental strength anymore
Yeah,
to
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
And but also another important thing to say, because again, the white socialists, the white left, often complain that it's our people that should have propped up Bernie Sanders, and that we should be joining forces with these large unions to push for a better world and so forth. But if a large bunch of unions, which are mostly white, however strong or weak they are, if only the National Nurses Union, I believe, was one of the
Yeah.
few. I believe they were one of the few unions to even endorse somebody like Bernie Sanders. Then there is something deeply, deeply wrong with our unions, which are mostly white. And if they're not white, they're certainly just those black folk who say we have to be loyal to the Democrats because the Republicans are worse and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. I write about that in the book. Really, the book, The Class Struggle, and why the elites, why the 1% is beating why the 1% is beating the brakes off the 99%. You can really attribute it to the failure of all American institutions, but none, I would argue, none so much as the media, right? With these fabulous narratives which don't inform our democracy. And I would say right on the same par with them, traditionally, historically, has been the labor unions, right? Which have failed to respond to their workers. If Lorraine Hansberry has a quote, I can't remember it exactly, but she said, if the people are left to their own devices, they will find a common ground and they will work together and they will get what they deserve. And the labor unions, which for a period of time, I would say roughly between um, really stridently between 1935 and 1945 when the war ended, and then still tenuously up until I'd say around 1975, there was a real relationship between the black and white workers. There was much racism in the union, right? But there was still this sort of dynamism caused by black and white workers talking just enough to move ahead, right? There were lots of problems, particularly in places like the UAW and the unions, which were in the, I don't want to go too much in the weeds on this, but the Taft-Hartley Act, which was the labor legislation that reformed unions, they created loyalty boards because they were trying to weed out communists. But their communism was of a very specific sort. So the loyalty boards that were created, they would ask questions like this. Do you know if such and such has ever entertained black people at his home for dinner? They would ask of a black worker, have you ever danced with a white woman? Right? These are the questions, the kinds of, I'm not making this up. These are the kinds of questions that these loyalty boards ask of workers to weed out communists, which tells you what? They weren't really weeding out communists. They were weeding out that element in the workforce that was willing to work across racial lines. That's been the target. And so the unions worked with the government because they had, much like we talked about Norman Finkelstein and Chris Hedges and so many others, although there are some exceptions, we should be upfront about that. Michael Hudson is one I would say is an exception.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Sachs, I think, seems to be an exception. But they have a stake in being white. There are very few people, but they have. Bernardine Dohrn is another one of the most dynamic people I've ever met, activists I've ever met. But they understand that there's a. I don't know if you're into hip hop, but there's an old line by the group Mobb Deep. Ain't no
Yes.
such thing as halfway crooks, right? Well, it ain't no such thing as
Ain't no
halfway
such thing as
working
halfway
class, right?
crooks.
Yeah,
Shook
right.
ones.
Yeah, and so I think that is what the unions typically need to learn. Now again, there is some hope that things are changing. What we've seen, particularly in the last 6 months, is the unions taking a much more progressive stance. And there's a thing which I think you can attribute to Black people. I don't think that's a stretch, called civil rights unionism, because Blacks, particularly if you look at Africa, we've seen labor unions as an extension of democracy, as an extension of the community, right? So we're not just concerned with how much our pay is and the how many vacation days do we get, but we extend the union into the community and we say, well, what about Palestine, right? And we've seen that, and that was a feature of labor unions during the sort of the high times of labor unionism in the 30s and 40s, where the labor unions really sided with Blacks and civil rights issues, affordable housing issues, really led to the formation of the civil rights movement, which led to the radical Black Power movement. But at the same time, you had union leaders like Walter Reuther, famously, who was on the stage with Dr. King at the March on Washington, the only white person on the stage on the dais, was actively working against his Black workers. So, again, what people don't know here in the United States, Walter Reuther is often, his name is said, and he's seen as a paragon of labor unionism and racial collaboration. It was so bad. Blacks hated him so much. Black union workers hated him so much. My father was a UAW member. They hated him so much that in the 70s, before he died in a plane crash, they would have strikes, wildcat strikes, right? Strikes that weren't authorized. And they would have placards that said things like, "Put a halter on Walter," right? Speaking of the women's tops, I don't know what they call them now, but which you could argue
tops or something like that.
Yeah. Or they would say, what else did they say? Oh, they would say UAW, United Auto Workers. They would say United Auto Workers stands for "You Ain't White," right? And this was a protest against Walter Reuther, right? Who was, he was from West Virginia, and clearly he took the side under the guise of anti-communism. He clearly saw the UAW as part of a tripartite alliance with the Democratic Party and the big three automakers, and that he was obliged to work on behalf of the white workers mostly, and to keep the Blacks down. Like, I don't know where that lack of critical thinking or originality comes from, but it's the same thing that plagued Bill Clinton, who just he didn't have the vision to see, bro, you can get a lot more traction. This could be a lot more sustainable if you develop, the Democratic Party to bring in all these people who don't vote. I mean, 100 million people, even in 2020, the highest turnout in history, I think it was almost 100 million people who were eligible to vote who didn't vote. So, yeah, it's just a lack of radical imagination by the American people. But, very soon, I think it's going to come to time. You're going to have to really start to put things back together, because they're going to come apart very, very quickly.
But that's a perfect segue then to one of my last questions, which is now, why do you why do you think the broad people power movement should not do the following, which is you vote for Kamala just to block a Trump victory, but then mobilize like hell, like it's countdown to nuclear annihilation against the austerity and imperial agenda of her and the Democrats. Now, Yasser Louazi, very good French Muslim civil rights leader, leftist, he said when it was Macron versus Marine Le Pen the first time around, he said that we have to vote against Marine Le Pen, make sure that she and her party does not get into power, and then mobilize like hell against the austerity and the warmongering agenda of a Macron. Why do you feel the people power movements in the U.S. shouldn't have that approach when it's Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump? I'm curious to response.
I think the first thing to consider is that it is beyond politics. It's a moral issue. I just don't think we want that stain on our collective humanity to aid and abet a genocide, right? Kamala Harris is complicit in the murder, the mass murder of, the last estimate I heard is something like 240,000 people, Palestinians
Palestine.
who I beg to remind people, in the words of Muhammad Ali, they ain't never called me the N-word, right? The Palestinians, I couldn't say that about Israelis, particularly Benjamin Netanyahu. I bet he's used the N-word before, right? So that's the first issue, right? I just don't think we want to stain our humanity by voting for a genocider, right? Secondly, I think it's a strategic issue, right? After 32 years of running against their base, in fact, the Democratic Party punishes their base to appeal to white racists. I think now is the time. It's been time, but now certainly 2024 is the time to tell the Democratic Party that that dog won't hunt anymore, right? You're going to have to think of something new, or to put another way, you can continue to try to appeal to white racists, or you can win elections, but you ain't going to do both, right? And so that becomes an opening one way or another. Either they will say no, or they will say, okay, well, how do we do this? But either way, that's an opening for the people to mobilize, to organize. Do you create a movement outside the Democratic Party? Do you go with the Greens? Do you create something outside that? For African Americans, I think, it's a question, do we create a movement that is specifically for Blacks, but that collaborates with the Greens, or a Democratic Party that is reforming, but it's something we need specifically for ourselves as a super exploited people? I just think that no matter who wins, I think but no matter who wins on Tuesday, the people are going to have to organize and fight like hell, right? We are in a post-industrial age. We're probably approaching certainly a very deep recession, and perhaps a catastrophe even worse than the Great Depression is possible, at least when you look at the money that we are spending that is not productive. It doesn't go towards productive uses. And so those catastrophes in tandem, I think, there's only, what did Frederick Douglass say? If we are to be saved, it will be by the crew, not the captain. And I think that's what people need to learn from this. I'm not sure we will. I think there are promising signs. Again, these protests against Gaza, against what's happening in Gaza on the college campuses, augur a third reconstruction, as the Reverend William Barber might say. It's not inevitable, but I do think that could happen in the next few months and years. I hope it does, because we're on the brink, I think, of something really catastrophic and really unprecedented. We've never seen the greatest industrial state in the history of the world become a post-industrial state. And I don't think people realize that, that is just of a magnitude we can't even imagine.
In the future, I have to have you back in the future for two programs. One all about South Africa, and one about your studying of the Russian Revolution when the Bolsheviks took power, because you saw a lot of very interesting stuff, which definitely requires like an entire hour or two.
I would love it.
But then But then I do have to ask this question, because you mentioned how how the Russian people and others in what used to be the USSR were very friendly towards Black people, and the kind of racism of Russians against Ukrainians, Ukrainians against Jews against Roma, how that was starting to become a thing of the past under Lenin and his political education. So all that being said, and given what you've said about the Communist Party of the U.S., do you think it's long overdue that the left abandons its anti-communist leftism?
That's a complicated question. Well, let me say this: communism is not our primary enemy, right? It's like I'm loath to quote Jerry Seinfeld, who I loathe, but he used to tell a joke about a commercial for detergent, and it talked about how the detergent was so good it could even get these huge blood stains out of your clothing, right? And Jerry Seinfeld says, I'm going to suggest that if you got a blood stain that big, laundry is not your biggest problem, right? Like you you have much bigger problem. So that's the first thing I would say. I would say that communism is not our biggest problem. I'm not sure it's a problem at all. On the flip side of that, neither do I think in a direct sense is communism the answer, at least not communism as it's been practiced, right? I am my two biggest influence on my thinking. There are lots of people, but the two biggest are Karl Marx for his critique of capitalism, which is, I mean, you have to respond to it. Either you're for it or against it, but you have to respond to Karl Marx's critique of capitalism to be useful. And the other is Malcolm X for his critique of racial capitalism, right? Because you have to understand racial capitalism, to really understand what we're up against and to forge a way ahead. And so I say all that to say, I still think, communism is useful. What they call scientific communism is useful in understanding that the source of our problems is private property, right? That is on the most molecular level, private property. What should the people own, and what should individuals own? I mean, still, I think the question that you can't escape, whether you're a communist or a capitalist, is why do the workers do 100% of the work for, in America, 42% of the pay? Like that, you just can't. It's like there's only one answer to that question. You know what I mean? And so, anyway, that's what I'm saying is I find communism very useful, right? I think it's fine to critique the failures of communism because I think I mentioned William Patterson, for instance, who was the best friend of Paul Robeson and many other communists, black communists, and people who just if they weren't formally members of the Communist Party, they certainly believed in the Communist Party. And many of them abandoned communism or called themselves post-communists, like Harry Haywood. But that is a response to communism's failure to continue what Lenin started. Stalin, and there might be different reasons for this, right? But when World War II happened, the Soviet Union and the international communists really kind of abandoned certainly the African liberation movements. And then again, the Africans will tell you, many Africans will tell you that while the Soviets were certainly helpful, and they certainly weren't the enemy like the United States was, right? Cubans, I think, Fidel Castro, I think, has said this. There was never a feeling among many Africans that the Soviets were really in it to win it, that they were really allies who were there to the end, right? That at a moment when they thought they might be able to negotiate some kind of rapprochement with the United States, they were out, right?
Yeah,
and the Africans were on their own.
And also the China of back then, although like you said, much better on foreign policy compared to compared to America and its allies. But there were some moments where the Chinese it wasn't their finest hour, like supporting Pol Pot, like supporting South Africa apartheid, and
I didn't even know that the Chinese supported apartheid South Africa. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
It's one of the worst things about Deng Xiaoping, who did many of the much needed necessary to advance China. He supported apartheid South Africa, and they also supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Oh, I did not know that. I did not. That's amazing.
Exactly. But that being said, I'll say that I'll say this to white socialist Marxists of all of all mostly white countries, whether it's America, Australia, Eastern Europe, and so forth. You guys read about the Haitian Revolution, and y'all read about some of our black leftists, and even I would say the indigenous ones, and I'll make sure that like my people read more Marshall Tito and all the different communist models of Eastern Europe, because I think in the end of the day we all have to learn from all of these different models, learn
no
worked,
question,
what didn't work, and so forth.
No question. And if I can end on this very quickly, I was thinking about this today. That reminds me of the Portuguese and their Carnation Revolution, which
Yes.
was inspired. You probably know this, but it was
Yeah.
inspired by the Portuguese war against their African colonies in Mozambique and Angola and Guinea-Bissau. And when they would take Africans captive, the Africans would say, because they had a dictator very much like Franco in Spain,
Yeah.
Salazar, and I think
Oh, yeah.
after him,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it was a junta basically. And the Africans who they captured, they would say, "Man, why are you fighting me? We're fighting the same person." And finally, it clicked for some of them, and they held the Carnation Revolution, a revolution that happened without a shot. And I guess it didn't last long, but they were
It
compelled
got
to
hijacked
revolt.
by the anti-communist leftists who
Yeah.
now are EU, which is now the EU, which yeah,
Oh,
pan-European,
oh,
yeah, pan-Europeanism took over that, and yeah, this is just a side note, but it's remarkable that a place like Spain, a place like Greece, a place like Portugal, these were all founding members of NATO, which was explicitly created to eradicate the communist movements that helped eradicate fascism, and
oh my.
those three countries all ruled by a right wing junta, literal fascists. Like in Greece,
Right,
like in Greece, one of the military dictators was an actual Nazi collaborator, and yeah,
right,
from
right.
doing space. So that's so. But yeah, the NATO socialists unfortunately like hijacked the Carnation Revolution and whatnot. Second to last question before I let you enjoy the weekend. I asked this to Norman Finkelstein. I didn't like his answer, so I had to ask you this question. What's it going to take for the broad U.S. left and people power movements to show more urgent solidarity to the plight of Native Americans, Indigenous Hawaiians, and Indigenous Alaskans? What I'm curious your
Oh man,
response.
that's a tough. Yeah, that's going to be a heavy lift. I will say that's going to be a heavy lift, but I would say this: I do think that it is possible if we see these movements that really start. I mean, really, they started after the crash in 2008 with Occupy. And
Yeah,
Occupy was limited in its effectiveness because, and they will admit this, I think many of them will admit this, they weren't very diverse. It was started by really college students, many of them white, certainly of the upper class, and they couldn't quite reach out to communities of color, and they realized that. And then, of course, that sort of bled into Black Lives Matter, which was a related issue, which was the police suppression against African Americans, particularly in this economic downturn. And we know that economic downturns lead to political crises, most specifically in the United States. They police violence against people of color. So I guess what I'm saying is that I do believe that if this third movement, which I think starts with the anti-genocidal protests on college campuses, if it balloons as I hope and expect that it will, if it intersects with movements like police brutality, I do think there's the possibility that it can start to incorporate what happened, the original sin, right? And I say that as an African American, the original sin. I mean, you have to understand um, the you talk about genocide. The genocide in the United States um, is the fastest in the history of the world. 90% of everyone that the Europeans came into contact with when they arrived here were dead within a century. That's just astounding. And so I do think we certainly need to address that. It's going to be a heavy lift. I think it can happen. I think it probably needs to happen if we're going to really have any kind of. I mean, and I'll say this to end this answer this question, which might be a little bit unsatisfying, but I don't really know the answer. But I do think that the point that we're going to have to get to, because racism is very real, right? It is, and I think we are seeing more and more people, younger people, who are willing to reconsider it. It's still very real. It's like a religion here in the United States. I don't know about other places, but in the United States, racism is like a religion, right? And so I say all that to say that I do think the
Australia.
next
Well,
step.
Australia and Israel does give the U.S. a run for its money. That's for sure.
Oh, Australia too. I didn't
When it
realize
comes,
that.
oh yeah, when it comes to settler colonialism and white supremacy,
Wow.
oh,
Yeah.
I think, Australia. Just like the Turks' genocide denialism and the Japanese World War II denialism, Australia literally has that with its Aboriginal people,
Wow.
where you actually have white supremacist academics, junk journalists, and whatnot who say there was no genocide against Aboriginal people. Their culture was starting to decline, and actually, they should be thankful that us white settlers came because we gave them civilization and capitalism and all sorts of stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
whereas even though Native Americans are criminally overlooked, and you do have stupid people who keep celebrating the founding fathers and Christopher
Right.
Columbus.
Right.
There still is a little bit of acknowledgement that, hey, it's wrong that we're celebrating John Wayne movies where he's a genocidaire, and it's wrong we're celebrating these white supremacists when Native Americans are still, uh, you know, getting the worst of
Yeah.
of white supremacy and so forth like
Yeah. Yeah.
and that and I do have to agree with with what you were saying. We do have to shout out to the Palestine justice groups. There's been a lot of Native Americans, but there's been a lot of indigenous people in general in the Nordic countries. A lot of Sami people and Roma people have been protesting in solidarity for the Palestinians. I know with my friends in Australia who are who are indigenous, lots of indigenous people have been protesting for Palestine and making the connection. So that's going to be good in the long term for the Palestine justice groups to show more solidarity to the plight of Aboriginal people. And then we do see it in both New Zealand and Canada and the United States. Lots of Indigenous people are showing up to these protests. And in America, it's quite moving because because they literally are making that connection. The settler colonialism of Israel happens also here in the United States, and I know Red Nation podcasts have been showing up to a lot of the protests and whatnot. I believe
Yeah.
even Minar Adley of Minpress News, that in Minnesota, she literally was, leading a march with lots of Native Americans who were opening up the protest
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so forth like that.
Yeah.
So
The movement in Minnesota, I lived there for a while, is very robust, which is a testament to the Bellencourts. One thing I forgot though, I should say, I do think these climate movements, because the indigenous communities are so present in these climate movements, like Standing Rock here a few years ago in the United States and Canada, that is another, I think, opportunity, because I do think I hope slash think that this anti-genocide movement will intersect with a lot of different movements, including the climate movement, right? And that is something that I think can incorporate the indigenous people, because they are very present leaders of that movement. So I'm not the strongest person on climate. I just know that it's a real problem and one that I think we're going to have to address. So I think I don't want to be hopeless. I do think there's potential. And again, the indigenous populations here in North America are as politically astute as any community around. I include African Americans, who I think are the vanguard of the revolution. That's only because the genocide has killed so many indigenous people here in the United States. But I think there's a possibility. I really do think there's going to be an opportunity to rebuild the United States. And I hope I don't sound like Pollyanna by saying that I think there is a possibility. I don't know how much, but I think there's a real possibility that we might actually produce the United States that the world deserves over the next few years. I don't know if I'll live to see it, but I think it's
hopefully.
possible. I think it's possible. Yeah, I do.
All righty. Well, and as John Pilger says, well, nothing's going to change until we right the wrongs of the bloody past.
Right.
So we give them back their nationhood. We can never claim our own, and we cannot call ourselves a just society until that issue of settler colonialism is addressed and is
Yes, no
radically
question.
eradicated and decolonized.
Yes, I don't disagree with a single word. That is correct.
Well,
That is correct.
well, also Haiti as well, and we also cannot have a liberated world unless Haiti is fully liberated. We owe a debt
Yes,
to Haiti.
yes.
Well, John, we usually end the show doing the questionnaire done by Marcel Proust, later the popular late French broadcaster Bernard Pivot, and later my hero, the late great James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio. John, it's your turn to
Oh,
do
wow.
before you enjoy the rest of the weekend. So here it goes. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word?
Yeah, favorite word. Just one word. Favorite word.
Oh, boy. Is self-determination one word or two?
I'll happily accept that. Self-determination.
Okay.
Okay,
That's what came to mind.
Then what is your least favorite word?
Well, God, I think I'm not sure I would have said this a year ago, but I'd have to say genocide right now.
All righty.
I'd have to say genocide. Yeah.
Yeah. Then what turns you on emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually?
Oh man, communication with people like you, brother.
All right.
Conversation with like-minded people, man. That's man.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
most beautiful
no.
thing in the world.
I know exactly how you feel. I feel the exact same way. Then what turns you off then?
Oh my God. Just one thing. I just have to say, I think it's the scourge of the millenniums, settler colonialism. I just think it's the scourge of the millennium.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything bad comes back to that.
And as we've been talking about, it even infects even the best of the white left sometimes.
Oh, no question, no
So
question.
then, so that's what turns you off. Then, what sound or noise do you love?
What kind of noise?
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh man, I love children laughing, and of course I love music. Jazz, hip
Yeah.
hop. I love children laughing and music. I think are the two most joyous sounds in the world.
All right. Well, we gotta come and get you to come visit us in Berlin with my twins and the music that my sister plays. Then. Oh, wait, hold up, hold up. Oh, can you still hear me, John? Oh no, it's internet today. Okay,
Are you
we're
there?
back. Okay, we're back. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. We're back. Oh, I was just saying that we gotta come and get you to come visit my sister in Berlin because with her twins and a new one coming and the music she plays, you would definitely feel very much at home.
Okay.
Then what's that?
I should probably say I like the sound of other people's children laughing. So, so I can
Then
give them back.
what sound noise do you dislike?
Oh God. I hate to hear people in pain, crying, shrieking. Oh my God, that keeps me up at night,
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
Then
yeah.
then what is your favorite curse word?
This is probably unoriginal, but fuck, I think is probably the favorite.
Don't take that way. We've heard that many times, so no problem. And then, what profession other than yours would you like to attempt? So, if you weren't doing the great independent journalism you're doing, and you were once a Washington Post reporter, so if you weren't doing journalism and books, which and I am gonna get your both of your books for Christmas. So, what profession other than yours would you love to do?
I would be a jazz trumpeter. Hopefully
Yes,
a good one.
trumpeter. Nice.
Yeah, I would be playing yeah, I would be a Miles Davis knockoff.
Electric Miles, Electric Hippie Miles.
No, 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 no. The original, the heroin addict Miles.
Okay, so
The kind of blue,
okay,
the kind of blue
so not the
Miles.
bitches brew Miles.
Right, right. No, 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 no. Before that, yeah, the kind
Okay,
of blue Miles.
then
Yeah,
then what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
a police officer, a cop. I guess a politician would be up there too, but I had to say a police officer. Yeah.
Final one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision of the afterlife? And even if you're an atheist, please do answer the question.
Nicely done.
Fantastic.
Nicely done, baby. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, we are joined on this epic, nearly 3-hour edition, the Youri Rogan Experience, with Jon Jeter, who types frequently for Black Agenda Reports, news, commentary, and analysis from a Black left perspective. He worked before that as a Washington Post correspondent reporter, which I definitely want to revisit with him next time we have him on the show. And he is the author of Flat Broke in the Free Market: How Globalization Fleeced Working People. And he has a new book out called Class War in America: How the Elites Divide a Nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? And to our white leftist friends, guys, just read a little bit of critical race theory, and it'll be fine. And in return, we'll read more about the French Revolution and the Soviet Union. Well, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time on coming on a Saturday evening to come on 1+1. And hold on, folks.
Broke up on me just a little bit there.
Yes. Okay. Well, Jon, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time on coming on a Saturday evening. It was such an honor to talk to you. I hope that this will be the first of many conversations we have, both on and off the air. And folks, please do get Jon's work. Subscribe to Black Agenda Report. Donate generously to them. And of course, please share widely 1+1 and donate generously. And once again, Jon, thank you so much for coming on the program.
It's been my pleasure. It's been my pleasure. Can't wait to come back.
Likewise.